But of course, there is some semblance of preparedness being done. But realistically, how could you relocate hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people there?
She said, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. This is the point. When the when politicians they have to decide, they don't want to be the bearer of bad news, so they don't want to talk about tragedies, natural disasters, and action that have to be undertaken in order to avoid this kind of problem. For them, you know, I've been working with
it's
different...
for the scientists to tell them, not the politicians.
I have been working with different governments, and I know very well what happens in Europe, at least in America. And this is the point, that it's even understandable. I'm not criticizing. I say that today this is the reality and this is the situation. Politicians, they don't want to spread around bad news, or they don't want to worry the people. So they cannot say that in Manila may happen an earthquake which will kill millions of people. Hurricane is another business. We know that you want to do some risk reduction with hurricane. It's very easy. It's just problem of forecasting and doing what you said. But when you have to deal with an earthquake within the city center of the capital of the Philippines, the problem is totally different, and that's why you don't want to spread bad news, and that's why they probably will do very little in order to overcome the problem. Because this is, you know, the situation worldwide. I'm not criticizing one country than the other one. But this is the truth. Only in Japan and in California they did a very good risk reaction. But when did they start?
Senator Legarda, I want to put to you,
how much money did they spend?
If you're a politician and you're the UN's champion for risk reduction, shouldn't you be helping people in major urban conurbations inside your country understand risk and prepare themselves for it, like, say, in Japan?
Definitely. First, in the legislature, to which I belong, the Senate, we deliver speeches about it, we talk about it. Second, when I say I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, it doesn't mean I'm not supposed to announce it. It's the experts and the scientists. It's nothing new. This has been discussed for more than 10 years already. Thank God the earthquake has not happened. Preparedness is being done, and there may be difficulty in relocating people out of the cities, but we are prepared for that to the limits of our capabilities and resources. But what I'm saying is that we cannot just talk about it all the time. Let the agencies of government, the scientists, and the experts do something about it.
I think she's right. We shouldn't just keep talking about it. We need to do something about it.
Well, do what?
Let me tell you. We need to tackle it at the community level. That's the bedrock of all kinds of response. Yes, bottom up. You need to get first aid training, fire brigades, emergency stockpiles with community participation, and then build it up from there. We all talk at the international level and this, that, and what have you, and it's not very costly to work at the community level because there's participation of the people.
Well, let's go to someone who's been studying this, Marcus Oxley, from the Global Network of Civil Society. Bottom up versus top down. In other words, not governments issuing directives and instructions, but something which is generated from those who are being affected.
Yeah, I think it's both, actually. I think what we're seeing at the moment is that progress has been made at the national level, at the policies, at the procedural level, but what we're seeing is that same progress is not actually getting down to the local level. And I think what that means is that we've got to shift our emphasis less away from the policy formulation, where we've been focusing at the international and national levels, and more towards the realities of policy execution, which is about change at the local level.
Sarah Rudman, you're from the Bangladesh Disaster Preparedness Centre.
I think community empowerment is prerequisite for any initiative for community risk reduction. If we really want to reduce the risk of the poor, we have to understand and appreciate the root cause of the problem. And that is exploitation. They are exploited socially, they are exploited economically, even they are exploited politically. There is no problem of resources. But the poor have no access to those resources. Money is spent for relief, money is spent for infrastructure. A lot of money is spent on, expatriate consultant. But in Bangladesh, what we have shown, that if the people are empowered to assess their own risk, if the people are empowered to plan for mitigation of the risk, if the people are empowered to have access to public resources, only then they can bring about a sustained risk reduction at the community level, and that is what has been reflected in Bangladesh.
And the statistics are very clear. In one cyclone, a couple of decades ago, 500,000 people died. In Cyclone Sidr a year ago, only 3,000 died.
It is because of a very efficient and effective program in Bangladesh, which is called Cyclone Preparedness Program. 43,000 volunteers are working for the last 40 years.
Well, what we're hearing here is the variety of views about what should be done, how risks can be reduced, but whose responsibility is disaster risk reduction, and what should they do? Underpinning this question is another, prevention. How does it work? After the immediate shock, there is often the cry, why did governments not do more to predict and prevent? Some measures are now possible to minimize deaths and satisfy public expectations. Some rich earthquake-prone countries like Japan do monitor seismic activities. But a primary consideration remains how houses, offices and factories are designed and built. After the devastating Indian Ocean tsunami disaster of 2004, some early warning systems are now in place belatedly. Using relatively low-cost alert systems and some new infrastructure, Bangladesh has drastically reduced its vulnerability to cyclones and floods and has reduced the number of deaths. Measures to protect the environment are showing evidence that they are effective, in particular strategic planting to reduce the effects of encroaching deserts, landslides and floods. There is now a lot of pressure for more action. And one estimate concluded losses from disasters in the 90s could have been cut by $280 billion if $40 billion had been spent. What is now going to pressure, given the increasing occurrence of natural disasters, what is going to pressure communities and governments at all levels to move faster?
I think educating people is one of the main things. Holding politicians accountable for things like you saw on that, if there were schemes to mitigate it, is another. And ultimately, the biggest motivator to get people to spend on disasters are disasters themselves. If they've been through it once, yes, there will be a public outcry to help prevent them. But you cannot prevent disasters completely. We can't live in a bunker world.
I totally agree with Arjun. You can't prevent disasters. It's just physically.
But can you minimise them?
You can certainly minimise the impact. You can do an awful lot to minimise the impact by building resilience within communities. And the key, I think, what we heard from the gentleman from Bangladesh and what Arjun was talking about, we need to educate people as to what they can do. There's an assumption in the world today that the experts will arrive, the cavalry will arrive
after the
incident's taken place, or the prevention measures should have been put in place by the experts before the incident. What we need to do is to get people to be part of that response themselves. People need to know, what can they physically do? We don't sit here and we wait for someone to come and rescue us. Do we have fresh water in the house? Do we have supplies of food? How long can we exist if we need to for a long period of time without the normal facilities and utilities that we might expect to exist?
Guido, what motivates your government? What motivates your communities? Or will they never be motivated?
No, they are very much motivated. Since the L'Aquila earthquake, due to the fact that after a few minutes we were on the spot and we have been able to manage, I must say, in the very right way, this emergency, and everybody has been assisted as he should do.
And people have said it was a remarkable response.
Yes, it was. And thanks to that, now we have very strong credibility. And so we can try to speak with the people and empower community and try to teach them how to behave. What is important, people need to learn what to do in case of a risk, in case of a disaster. The vast majority of the people, they die when there is an earthquake or a volcano eruption, a forest fire, a flood, because they don't know what to do, because they do the wrong thing instead of doing what should have saved life. So there is a lot to do, an important job to do in spreading information and in keeping the people responsible for themselves in the way they have to address a risk. This is is for the community. The government, of course, has to improve the financial contribution for doing more forecasting in order to be able to do better prediction, and of course to improve preventive activity, but as well as emergency action.